Hey everyone, thank you so much for joining me. We have Rob, who is the CEO and chairman of Ferret.ai, which is a super interesting technology that's a relationship, um, that's like a smart relationship manager, where you can actually find out if someone what they're telling you is actually if they actually are trustworthy and legit. Why I think it's really fascinating. On the podcast we talk a lot about how in these times it's so fast moving, things are moving so fast, deals are happening so fast, it's hard to know who to trust, right? It's hard to know when you're actually have investor interest if what that investor is saying is accurate, or what if you're trying to make an investment in a founder, if what that founder is saying in terms of their history is actually accurate. So we're going to be diving a lot more. I know I'm being vague here. We're going to be diving a lot more into that with Rob here. Rob, how are you?
I'm doing great. Thanks, Mike, for having me on your show.
Hardly. Thank you so much for taking the time. I want to start from the very beginning because you are a serial entrepreneur. What was your initial attraction to technology and software?
I think that's a euphemism for I'm getting old.
No.
I've been at it a long time. Uh, so, what was that question again?
What was your initial attraction to
Uh,
software and entrepreneurship?
that's a really good one. I was actually supposed to go to law school, but I couldn't write the check, and I got invited into a software company to help sell software, and that software company was Sybase, which went big really fast back in the day. And I think what I really like about software and technology in general is just how fast it moves. You get to create something new every day, either something entirely new like a ferret, or continue, to reinvent the wheel. And you can also add to. I mean, you and I are using apps right now that are 20 years old, right? And they continually get new technology in them to keep them relevant. So I just like to move fast and I like to create things. And I can't think of a better place to do that than in the technology field.
No, I mean totally. I think that is one of the what is beautiful about software and technology. You say it's very fast moving. At the same time, the software also lasts for a heck of a long time. We're using applications that are 20 years old, as you say. What? So I know that your first company that you started, Octane. What was it like when you first raised capital at Octane? What was that experience like?
Scary. You're in a room with these titans of industry that are sitting on, a big, huge safe full of billions of dollars, and they decide who gets to play in the game and who does not. And we had no right being there. None of us had ever started a company before. But the team that we put together at Octane all came from, incredible technology stories of the day. So when we got there, they were more looking for what our propensity was, what our, if we had the raw talent, I guess, and the right idea at the right time to do it, because we had their guidance, and that's something we didn't really realize. So it was very scary, but I'll have to admit it was quite easy. The first big Silicon Valley VC we went to wrote a big check the first day we walked in, and we didn't have to go to two.
That's amazing. That's amazing
Yeah.
how the first one wrote a check and yeah, and you really had that conviction early on. What was though then, since it seemed like you had like the pick of the litter back then, how did you choose your investment partner, and how did that impact you as well? Starting on, you started other companies as well. How does that relate to how you think about choosing investment partners overall?
Well, that's all situational, right? It depends on the company. Like Ferret, for instance, we wanted investors that came from our target audience, our target go-to-market strategy, the channels we wanted to get into. So we wanted to go to basically the top of the heap first and go to investors, people that have a responsibility with their own and other people's money. And, once you tell them that there's this new tool that is head and shoulders above, and what they realize the tools you're using now are so lame, that they'll tell the world. I mean, Ferret has a potential to be as bigger than LinkedIn. I mean, think about it. When you meet someone, I bet when you heard my name, the first thing you did was go to LinkedIn and said, "Who's Rob Loughan?" Well, unfortunately, I wrote that. Right. There's a few things I left out because they didn't work out so much. They didn't work out so well. So you're never getting the complete picture in LinkedIn. You're getting what someone wants to write. And when you go to Google, you're getting what Google has access to. So walking into investors with Ferret saying now there's AI and there's these hundreds of millions of records and exclusive deals that you can't get yourself to improve your the ability to know who you're dealing with, they have to look. And then guess what happens? Each one of them tells you a story about they wish they had Ferret back then. Then they tell you a horror story because they weren't able to do due diligence and they had no visibility into the people they were dealing with. Because like you say, today, decisions are being made in a day. Deals are being signed in a week. Large checks are being written. So we need a tool that's that fast, right? So of course, in this particular deal, just to answer your question, I went after first because we all could use it. I went after the market that I thought needed it the most, and that's people investing other people's money fast, quick. They're competing for the good deals.
No, that makes sense. And I mean, as your experience as an entrepreneur, do you happen to have any horror stories where someone maybe had told you what their past was, and it was, they had this maybe incredible resume, but it turns out maybe they weren't very trustworthy when you actually got down to it.
How about they have powerful friends that are in the top floor of one financial center in New York, and you get introduced to them there and they want to write you a check the next day, right? There's not much time to do any real due diligence when someone has a check in their hand and they want to hand it to you, and it's in probably the most venerable building in the world to do deals in New York. I have a horror story. Unfortunately, when you find yourself that you can now in a position where you can start investing money and you've just come off some successes, and you're young, you think you know it all or you know enough, and you use your gut, right? We always use our gut. So the short story is I took money from someone that had nefarious intentions to steal the company if it became successful, and the documentation I signed allowed that. And I wasn't the first. And none of us, including the venerable investment firm that introduced me to this person because they were his client, knew anything about it. None of us did. So I lost my own money, a lot of my time, and unfortunately, that company didn't make it after being on in the Wall Street Journal for the impact it had on its space. So yeah, we all have that. Every single investor that wrote a check, all 35 of them, by the way, into Ferret, has a story to tell, a horror story like that one, where they wish they had Ferret and they didn't. A good example is Jeffrey Epstein. You go put his name into Ferret, and that deal, issue that he had in Florida comes right up. It's not on Google. It's nowhere. It's in Ferret. You cannot get that data anywhere else because it's in one of those exclusive databases that I did a deal with to get the information, historical data. Now, we wouldn't even know about Jeffrey Epstein if Ferret was around back then because no one would have taken a meeting, no one would have gone on that plane, and no one would have shown up on that island, right? Because they would have seen that and they would have run the other way. So that's part of what's behind Ferret, is trying to make the world a better place by knowing who you're dealing with, by having that information at your fingertips on your phone.
No, totally. So, I mean, when was your aha moment for starting Ferret, and how did you also, was it, you had a particular access to data, or you just were thinking about data differently?
Well, I didn't want to run a company again.
Okay.
I was actually in the tent at Davos, invited by, again, one of the largest one of the largest investment banks in the world. And I was standing in the tent getting vetted because you know what Davos is like. And I was a last minute, entered at the last minute. It took them 3.5 hours to vet me to let me in. And while I was by the way, if they had Ferret back then, they would have vetted me in 3.5 seconds. Wow. Okay, but that's not it. What happened was the partner that had invited me there to meet another company, which I, in fact, had sold a company that I had invested in at Davos. So that went well. She came to check on me and she said, I said, hey, you're late. Where have you been? She goes, well, while you were in here, I was out meeting with this other group and I'm about to do a deal. And I said, well, give me their name because I had nothing to do. I'm standing there and I was thinking about this company that I had invested in that had this data that they sold to banks. And it became very successful. They sold it to over, I think the count right now is 8,000 different banking institutions around the world use this data that I cut this exclusive deal with. But it didn't run on a phone. It didn't even run on a computer. It was literally a data service, where they sold data. So I got the name and I woke up the CEO I'd invested in while I'm at Davos. And I said, hey, I'm just trying to help out a friend here. Can you put this name in? She's about to do a deal. He put it in. He sent me a snapshot of the data. And he said, run for the hills.
Wow. I
showed it to her. Her face went white and she canceled the meeting. And she was on her way to sign the deal. I should have started the company then, but I just wasn't. I mean, that's the use case of, you can't come up with a better one than that. I'm at Davos with one of the biggest banks in the world and doing a deal. Anyways, where it really hit me was that same CEO called me and said, hey, I've been made an offer to sell the company. And I'm an investor. Time to cash out, right? He called me. I was the biggest investor. And I thought about it. He wanted advice. I woke up the next morning and I called him back and I said, don't sell the company. Let's build a partnership. I'm going to build a mobile app company and I'm going to bring the 1%er tool, right? The tool that banks and governments use to vet people. I'm going to put it on our phone and democratize it so all of us can use it. So we all know who we're dealing with, no matter how big the deal is or how small the relationship might seem. Like someone that you might bring in, an electrician. You want to know about them as much as the big bank wants to know about the person who's potentially a money launderer opening up an account. So that's what's really behind Ferret. Is I knew once I dropped it down, was able to shrink it, put it on here, and make it accessible to everyone, that it had the potential of making the world a better place and actually being potentially bigger than even a LinkedIn. LinkedIn only tells you part of the story of someone.
Totally. And LinkedIn only tells you what you want people to hear, of course.
Yep.
And so what kind of information can you find then on Ferret? Like when we're thinking about running background, like what are maybe red flags that you rugged in? You don't have to be specific to that deal per se, but what types of background do you, would it actually reveal?
It's vast. I mean, we're adding new data sources daily. I'd actually take a step back from that and say I'll tell you what's in there now in the vision. The vision is that transparency becomes the new norm. So that all of us, while we're dealing with someone, don't have to work hard. We just know everything that there is to know that's legally available and ethically available, by the way, in the context of the person that we're dealing with. So today, what I've got in there, which we're adding more every day, is all of like the sanction data, the really bad stuff. Is this person on a most wanted list? Can they not get on a plane, right? Because they're a really bad dude. Or all the way back to, are there court records, both existing and closed, which makes it very different than a background check, which is either state or, the country that it's in is all as far as their purview goes. It's about things that are finished, where we know about lawsuits that are filed in most cases and in many corners of the world now. It has data in there about the companies that someone has an interest in. When I mean a financial interest. Like I can tell you, give me a name, I'll tell you which companies that person had a financial interest in, and who their partners were in that deal, who they sat at the desk, who they sat at the board with, right? So there's derivative data that can come from there. There's data, so the white collar crime data, but there's also good data. We've gone and cut deals with data providers that will tell you about financial events, like someone selling the company, raising money, getting a big promotion. So we try to balance the juicy stuff that is, here's all the bad things this person has, the skeletons in the closet you don't know about, to, here are the good things. Here are the good things about the person you're looking up that can help you make a decision that's positive.
So it will only be the negative side to, a person's history. It will also be that LinkedIn as well, right? It'll also show what their go for it.
Well, I mean, if you're going to make an investment in a company, wouldn't you like to know if the founders of that company have been sued or in a lawsuit? They don't necessarily have to tell you. I mean, one of our investors found out that he dumped a bunch of money in a company, and the founder, who had a good exit before, a big exit, was being sued by another technology company for $60 million. And there's this thing called reps and warranties that you have to usually sign when you take someone's money. And it was not disclosed. And they found it, and they were able to pull the deal before they closed it, because excuse me, let me roll back. If they had Ferret, they could have not done the deal. Unfortunately, because this founder lied in the reps and warranties, they didn't find out about it until later, when that company sued the new company because the founder was being sued by them. So that's just a really, really good example that you would not get like in a normal background check company. And hey, let's say that happened in London. You'd never know about it here. We had another investor that brought in a new CFO to take one of their portfolio companies public. And he had come from another country. He had come from the US, and this was actually in Australia. And turns out that he had embezzlement and an embezzlement conviction, but it didn't show up in anything that they looked for in Australia. But it was too late. He was already there. So everyone has a story. That's what you'll learn. I bet you do too. Everyone that's listening to this, that's ever invested more than once, has a story, right? To tell about. They wish they knew who they.
No, totally. And I think what's also helpful too, I would think for entrepreneurs is, since Ferret also shows what previous investments that a person's made, right, in terms of other companies or maybe affiliations with companies, because I could see investors or maybe wannabe investors saying how they're in this deal, they're in that deal, they're on the cap table here and there, and I would think that Ferret would also be very useful for founders to maybe, doesn't have that access to that company to actually verify if that is true. Yeah. Right. Yeah. So Ferret's also, I think, a great way for companies that are fundraising, especially in these markets, since in the private markets, it's going so fast, and deals are happening so quick. And so I think that's also useful.
Yes, there's also this issue of, the haves and the have-nots of investors. I'm just a little angel investor. I don't have a bunch of tools and a big team to help me when I make a small investment. My checks are small. But this democratizes that again, right? Because it's bringing all those tools the one percenters have into there's 12 million accredited investors just in the US. They don't have any tools. This company could be built just off arming them with Ferret, right? They just don't have it. So that totally. That's when you've been. I mentioned earlier I was making a joke of being around a while, and I've invested and started a few companies, been lucky a couple of times. That gets old, and when you have kids, you start thinking, well, what can I do that leaves a legacy behind? And I was on another. I've given an interview to another show, and the host said he had this epiphany, and he said, there's 7-year-olds out there today that will not know what the world was like before Ferret, because they just know everything that there is that they need to know about everyone, because transparency to them is just like Facebook and Google is to us, but it wasn't to our parents. It'd be the same way. So it's all about democratizing this and making it accessible, because it's not. It's not. What do you do now? You go check Google and LinkedIn.
Yeah, exactly. And I think also a great point too is it's certainly democratizing access, and also it's saving time, which is
Huge.
our most valuable resource. And so the fact that you're actually saving the small angel investor, maybe the small venture fund who doesn't have access or tools to the major players, that you're actually saving them time. I mean, that's critical.
I often liken this, which is maybe reaching a bit too far, to the iPhone, and this was brought to my attention by one of the new teammates at Ferret, that the reason the iPhone took off wasn't just because it was cool and it had everything on one screen. There was an ROI. You got all those tools that you used to have multiple devices for in one. And it actually made sense financially and for time and convenience. And that's, the boring side of Ferret is now we have all these tools and all these data sources in the palm of your hand for, pennies a day. And you don't need multiple subscriptions to all these different others. If you could even get 1/10 of our sources, it would cost you a fortune, right? For one person to have access to all of these tools in one place.
No, I mean, yeah, absolutely. Centralizing it as well, right? Yeah. And so right now, let's talk a little bit about the stage that you're in. You currently have a beta. What has so far been the reaction to Ferret in your beta?
First of all, what we're doing is really hard. So you can imagine these millions of new records being popped out every day around the world that we're looking at. And you have someone named, Chris Smith in your contacts. And an article comes out mentioning someone named Chris Smith. How do you curate that data to your Chris Smith and my Chris Smith if they're the same or different? And we talked earlier about why investors write checks. These are problems that have been around forever. There's this new thing called machine learning and AI that can actually prosecute, if you will, that very difficult technological challenge of looking for a couple of needles in hundreds of thousands of haystacks with hundreds of millions of needles in each one. Okay, so that's why the reaction is usually wow, because listen. The first thing you do is you walk in, you hand this to someone. You don't try to tell them what it's going to do. You just hand it to them, to an investor. Every one of them has a story, so they think about the story. They go type the name in, and it sifts through all those haystacks around the world. It comes back, goes bing, and then we open up Google and we say, now try it on Google, and they open up Google. It's not there. It's obviously not on user-generated platforms like social media or LinkedIn or anything like that. And then, we ask them, do you think that data is going to be in a background check? And they go, probably not. It could be. It's possible. But, but finding it, so hard. And so Ferret has a community validation behind it too. So it's not just all AI. It's using the whole Ferret community that's using the app to validate data for everyone else along the way so that it's accurate. So that's the good stuff. Now I'll tell you the bad stuff. The bad stuff is that's really hard. There's duplicates out there. There's what we call our boogeyman, if you will, is called false positives. And I'm late delivering this app by a couple of months. I'm late because I gave our team a number and said, your accuracy has to be at this number. And we're bouncing right above that number right now. And when we hit that number, then we'll open it up to the whole, to the whole world. So the reaction has been wow, because it is really, it really does find the information, and we can show with 2 phones how once you find it and then 10 other people are asked if that's your person in these articles, everyone else that has that Chris Jones in their contacts automatically gets updated automatically. And I'll remind you that the CCPA and GDPR guidelines and laws and rules are all adhered to. We take that very, very seriously. I'm paying 4 law firms right now to make me sleep at night to make sure that we've done everything properly.
Oh man. But that's great though. I mean, that's amazing that it also understands, obviously, in terms of the accuracy, why, you're still in beta. But I know you have a great offer for anyone that listens to the show, ConsumerVC, that they can get to the top of the beta list. I've submitted the links, by the way, in the comments here. And so if you are listening and want to check out Ferret, see what this is all about, and really save some time when if you're a founder and you get approached by an investor, or if you're an investor and you think a company looks really interesting and you want to learn a bit more about that person before you make a deal, which I highly recommend. Check out, submit the link, check out the beta for Ferret, and see. Yeah. Awesome.
Yeah, we'd love the feedback. Remember, I am a small-time investor and absolutely a founder. And I've invested a lot of my own money, and I've built companies with other people's money. We want to get this right, and we would love the feedback. And we are being very judicious about how and who and when we open the kimono and let people in bits and small groups at a time, so we can really truly get their feedback and advice on how to make it more more powerful for them. Because remember, it monitors too. So if you got a portfolio of investments, one of our investors has 550 active investments. Multiply that by the officers of that company, maybe 10,000 people. How do you keep track all around the world of those investments, of what's going on, not just with the company, but the people in it that you wrote the check behind? We do that. That's hard to do. I don't know where you can find that anywhere else in the world right now, just that one feature. And you wake up every morning, and I'm telling you, what we heard when you asked me what the response was, it's almost like relief. That now you don't have to wake up every morning and wonder what's going on in the companies in your portfolio. Ferret's going to tell you what went on that day.
It's amazing
when it happens. So it's a tremendous time saver, knowing that you got Ferret watching out for you and letting you know about not only the deals that you're going to do, but the deals that you've done.
Yeah, well, just like how those 4 lawyers keep you sleep at night, if you have Ferret, then it keeps you sleeping easy at night when you're thinking about striking a deal with an investor or a founder. So
right, and it's not just for investors. That's the market we want to service first, because we think that they need it the most. Especially like you said earlier about how fast everything's moving. You got to have a fast tool like Ferret. You're going to get in trouble or left behind or make a bad decision because you're forced to by the pace. But we all can use Ferret. It's all about bringing transparency to everyone, about the people they deal with every day. We sat around here, we sat around the round table at my company here, and we said, who should we go after first? We don't want to be everything to everybody. Let's solve one market first. And after we get that sorted, we can move into other markets. But as I said before, the vision is, if you're using LinkedIn and Google right now, you probably should have Ferret, and that's a very large market. Someday we'll be potentially in those kind of numbers of users. The same reason you go to Google, the same reason you go to LinkedIn, only better.
Amazing. Rob, this has been such a pleasure. Thanks so much for joining me here on LinkedIn.
Thanks, Mike. Thanks for having me. I really enjoyed it. You have a good day.
You too.